Well, then you end up representing Bill Cosby.
Yes.
Okay. So in December of 2015, three Class 2 felony charges for aggravated indecent assault were filed against Bill Cosby in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. So this was based on allegations by Andrea Constant from a situation back in 2004. And I guess Constant and her attorney, because originally that case was sealed, right? And they had actually filed a motion to negate the confidentiality agreement because they said that Cosby had engaged in total abandonment of the confidentiality portions of the agreement. And a judge actually ruled that releasing the sealed documents was justified because of Cosby's role as a public moralist, in contrast to his possible criminal private behavior. Number one, do you agree that these documents should have been unsealed?
Let me say this. The Cosby case is on appeal. Mm-hmm. It's in front of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. They've already had oral argument, and we're waiting for a ruling. I don't want to say anything that could affect what the Supreme Court does or doesn't do, but let me say this. This was the most unfair trial of my career. Consider the following. First of all, they did not file the case in time. It's what is called a statute of limitations issue. You have to file a case in a certain amount of time, or you can't file it at all. We did our research and proved they didn't file this case on time. We filed our motion and all our evidence, and the judge refused to have a hearing on statute of limitations. That's what we call a jurisdictional issue. The case should never have been tried. There was no jurisdiction, but the judge wouldn't even have a hearing on that. Second of all, the prior district attorney of Montgomery County testified under oath that he made an agreement with Mr. Cosby's prior lawyers that Cosby would not be prosecuted, and because he was not going to be prosecuted, he should take a civil deposition. And that former district attorney to this day maintains, I entered into a binding agreement not to prosecute him. There was a hearing on that agreement, and the trial judge ruled that the former DA wasn't credible. Now, what was the relationship between the trial judge and the prior DA? They had been political opponents for DA. It had been a vicious, nasty campaign. So all of a sudden, you've got two opponents. One guy wins DA. He enters into an agreement not to prosecute Bill Cosby, which he to this day says was a binding agreement. His opponent, who lost, becomes the trial judge. Then there's a hearing on the binding agreement, and the trial judge decides his former opponent was not credible when he said, I entered into a binding agreement. This issue is before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, okay? There's another problem, and that is that the judge allowed 5 other women to get on the stand and claim they'd been sexually assaulted. None of these cases were ever prosecuted. Some of them were 30 years old. Now, if somebody says 30 years ago, Bill Cosby assaulted me, tell me how we're supposed to defend that.
Right.
Can we find forensic evidence 30 years later? No. Can we find the witnesses 30 years later? No. Can we reconstruct what exactly happened 30 years ago? Of course not. So why are you allowing 5 women, none of whom were in criminal cases against him, to come in years later and testify in a case that involves someone else as the alleged victim, not them? It was purely done to prejudice the jury. It was purely done to deny Bill Cosby a fair trial. And if you put all of this stuff together, it was the most unfair trial I've ever been part of.